35 and 33. We want to look at this in some different translations, I think, here in verse number 33. Connie, what do you have back there? What translation do you have?
King James.
Could you read that for me in verse number 33?
Again ye have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, Thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths.
All right. All right, again, let's see who else has another translation. Don, what do you have? New International Version. Okay, could you read that for me?
Again, you have heard that it is said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but keep the oaths you have made to the Lord.
All right. Talking about making oaths. You have to remember the whole 5th chapter of the book of Matthew is directed at whom? To the leaders of Israel, mainly the Pharisees and the scribes and the high priest. This is who he's indicting, so to speak. Now, they had a real big habit of swearing by the temple, swearing by Jehovah and whatever, you know. They would not name the name of Jehovah, but they would swear by him, by the nameless one, by the name. Okay? Again, you have heard, it was told to the ancient ones, that you shall not perjure yourself. You shall not perjure yourself. And I want you to just think about that for perjury. You shall not commit perjury. That's what it's literally saying. You shall not commit perjury. Now, in the Old Testament time, if you committed perjury, what would happen? What was the punishment? First of all, perjury is what? What? It's lying. But it's lying in court, especially. I have to shut that thing off. It keeps having little fits. If you commit perjury in court, back in those days, it was a death penalty, wasn't it? You shall be stoned. Because it was not not a sin of omission. It was a willful sin, intentional lying, which many times would either take property from someone, would steal the property, or what? Or condemn them to death. Now, the Pharisees that Jesus is talking to right here, what were they going to do to him later? Just think about it. What would they do? They committed perjury before the Sanhedrin court and before Pilate to condemn him to death. They called in what kind of witnesses? What kind of witnesses they called in? False witnesses to condemn Jesus. That's perjury. That's what we're talking about. You've heard that it was told to the ancient fathers that you shall not commit perjury. You shall not commit perjury. And then he says here, but you shall fulfill all of your vows to the Lord. Corban. Corban. Now he's going to get to this later on. Corban. What's Corban mean? Corban. How many of them? Brother Rex, you're one of the smartest students I've ever had. You are now, brother. You are. That guy is sharp. He's a good student. He's a good student of history and everything. Corban.
Yeah, but I don't know what that means.
You know what that one means. You will in a minute. There might have been a little blank spot there, but you're going to know. All right? Corban. Anybody know what Corban means? It meant to devote to the Lord. I'm going to turn that down just a little bit. Let's see what happened. Probably turned it down too much now, didn't I? No?
I got to turn it up a little bit.
Up a little bit, okay. This is the first time for this. Maybe I ought to get some glue when I get it done. Glue it. All right. One of the things that he's going to condemn them later, is that better?
Yeah.
One of the things that he's going to condemn the Pharisees and the scribes and all of these, the leadership, the whole Sanhedrin, that he's going to condemn them, is that They were supposed to take care of their mothers and fathers when they got old. They didn't have Social Security or health care or anything back then. That's why it was so important for a mother to have children. Somebody could take care of her when she got older. Many times a husband was much older than the woman. He would be 50 years old and she might be 14 or 15. The last time my great-great-great-grandfather, he was 66 years old, and he married him a 14-year-old girl. That was a long time ago, in 1880-something, 70-something, 1875, I think. Well, many times the woman outlived the husband, and they had no way to put food on the table. All right? And the only way they could do this was to have children. That the children would provide for their mothers and fathers. But the Jews, these big shots, they would say, Corbin. They would take all of their wealth and dedicate it to the temple. Now, they could do anything they wanted to with their money right now, but all their wealth, they would dedicate it to the temple and say, well, I can't take care of my mother and father because all of my money is dedicated to the temple. So they tried to make themselves excluded from the law where it says to take care of your mother and father. That's Corbin. Okay? Jesus is hitting them on two areas. He said, thou shalt not commit perjury, which they would be guilty of when they did crucify him. They did it. And you shall carry out all your vows to the Lord. The vow to your mother and father to take care of them. Okay? Most of the time it was just the mother that they were taking care of because the father would already be gone. All right? Leviticus 19 and 12. All right? Now, another thing that they would do, a lot of people use the Lord's name in vain all the time, don't they? I know people that if you took out the swear words in their language, they wouldn't be speaking very much. They would be very short. If you took out all the hells and the damns and everything that they're doing in their speech, they wouldn't have anything to say. They would just be, Now then, partially, all of this is condemning all forms of profanity. It's condemning all forms of profanity, all right? Everybody has got to emphasize everything they're saying. They've got to emphasize everything they're saying with some powerful statement. You don't have to do that. Just make it. That's exactly what Jesus is telling us how to communicate right here. And he's telling them how to communicate because they were swearing by, they were using forms of profanity, and they were getting around it with loopholes, they thought. But I say to you, make no oath at all, either by heaven or for it is the throne of God. Heaven is the throne of God. Heaven's the throne of God. What's his footstool? What? Earth. That's right. So that's actually part of the throne too. The earth is where he sets his feet. I remember Brother what? Can't even remember his name. Now, he drew a picture up on the blackboard like this, with God sitting on his throne, and the earth was his footstool, like that. And that's the throne of God. Right here, the earth is his footstool. Make no oath, that is. What does the word oath mean to you Greek scholars? Huh? Oath. What does God do when he makes an oath? What does a man do when he makes an oath? Huh? He swears. He literally fences himself in. That means to fence yourself in. When it says that God committed himself to our salvation in eternity past, it meant he fenced himself in only to one way of salvation. Not by works, not by anything else, but by grace. By his grace would we be saved. Okay? And that means to fence yourself in. He said, don't fence yourself in at all, either by heaven or by the throne of God. What we ought to do is when we say something, people ought to be able to believe it.
That's right.
Huh?
That's right.
When you say something, people ought to be able to believe it. When you put your name down on a piece of paper, they ought to be able to count upon that as your legal authority. What does the word name mean? What does it mean? What is the Greek word for name? Onomate. Nomos is law. When you put your name to something, when you put your name, or even when you speak your words, it is by law you are accountable for it. You're by law, you're accountable for it. By the throne of God or by the earth. Verse number 34, or by earth. For it is the footstool of his feet, as I just showed. Just like I just showed. Right. The footstool of his feet, or by Jerusalem. These Jews, these Pharisees, would swear by the throne of God. They wouldn't use his name. It says, thou shalt not use the Lord thy God's name in vain. So they started swearing by his throne. They wouldn't use his name. They wouldn't speak the name of Jehovah. We don't even know how to say that word in all reality, do we? Kind of like what? You Hebrew students, how would you say that? Literally. Without the vowel. Just start with the yod and breathe. That's it. All you got is yod and breathe. It's breath. It's life. That's what the name means. It's breath and life. All right? And what does Jehovah mean? What does it mean? He who shall become. That's what it means. He who shall become. The becoming one. All right. Now, you're not going to swear by the name of Jehovah, which they didn't do. They called him Hashem, which means what? The name, or Hadabar, which means what? The Word. Jehovah was referred to in the Old Testament as the Word. That's why we have it in John 1:1. In beginning kept on being the Word, Jehovah. And Jehovah kept on being an inseparable part of God because he kept on being God. All right? John 1:14, Hologos Sarx again atone, which means what? And the Word, then Jehovah, flesh, he became. That's real simple, isn't it? Beautiful. All right? You will not swear by Jerusalem. You will not swear by the throne of God. You will not swear by his name, which you already know is wrong. Matthew 5 and verse 35. Or by Jerusalem, for the city of the great king. Where was Jesus was near Jerusalem when he was speaking these things, wasn't he? Who was the king of that city at that time? Who was the king of that city? He was an impostor. Herod. Who was supposed to be the king of that city? Jesus. Jesus was literally the heir to the throne, and he should have been on the throne he should have been on the throne chair in that city right then. Here is the king. All right? He said, now go back and read this all over again and start putting it in line and see what Jesus really said to them. Again, it is heard, you said to the ancients of old, you shall not, what? Perjure yourself. What were they going to do when they demanded his crucifixion? They perjured themselves. You shall fulfill all your vows to the Lord, even the ones that are where you take care of your mother and father and you cannot make another vow to supplant it, which was courting. Okay? So he's hitting them. Every word that he's speaking in this whole chapter is against the Pharisees. But I say to you, make no oath at all, either by heaven or by the throne of God. This is God speaking to them. He said, it's my throne in all reality. Or by the earth, for it is the footstool of his feet. He's talking about himself in really the third person, isn't he? Who is the physical expression of God? The only physical expression of God, that's Jesus. Okay, Jehovah. All right? Or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the what king? The great king. And who was the great king? He was. He's hitting them from all sides. He's surrounding them. He's indicting them. Now he in verse number 36. What does it say in verse number 36? Who's over there? Anna, are you over there?
Do not even say by my head, for you can't turn one hair white or black.
Nor shall you make an oath by your head. Basically, that's your life. Okay? Now, nor shall you make an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Now, that's, people do that today.
Yes, we do.
But it looks only on the surface, okay? Matter of fact, you you couldn't even put a hair on your head. But people do that also today.
Yeah.
But you can pretty much tell it. Back in the book there, Leaders and Leading Men of Indian Territory, we recently got a picture of William Hall, which was my great-great-great-aunt Sippy's husband. When he was young, he was bald-headed. Later on, after they got real rich and everything else, there's another picture of him in there with a full head of hair. That wasn't his hair. We noticed that, all right? You can't add one hair to your head, not in reality. How many of you knew that John Wayne was bald-headed?
You what?
He was bald-headed as he could be, just bald as a billiard. Like bald as a billiard, they say. But he wore toupees almost all his movies. Then look now, next time you could tell he's wearing a toupee in the movie. All right. I had a friend out in Taft, California when I moved out there. He was a movie star. And he did a lot of promotions and he did a lot of these documentaries. And if you go out to Taft and to the Taft Oil Museum out there, and you will see him speaking and narrating a film out there about the Taft oil fields and everything. In that movie, he's got a full head of hair. He said he put his wig on and did it, you know. He said, when I'm getting ready to go to do a movie or something like that, I always just stick my wig on and go on about it. You cannot make one head of your hair white or black. We've been trying to circumvent that, haven't we? But let your statement be yes, yes, and no, no, and anything beyond this is what? Huh? Whoredom. Whoring around. That's what the term is. Ponero. Poneru. It is evil. That's what he said. Anything else is evil. So what is he doing to the Pharisees? He said, you people are a bunch of whoremongers. That's what the word means, whoremonger right there. Everything else is horrible. Verse number 38 now. Verse number 38. You heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now, this is talking about retaliation. Now, what kind of a Messiah was Israel looking for?
On the white horse.
One on a white horse. One conquering to conquer that was going to run the Roman Empire off and do away with it. Okay? Now look and see what he does. When Jesus came back, when he came the first time, when he rode in now, he hadn't ridden into the city of Jerusalem yet, had he? When he rode into the city of Jerusalem, they said he rode a white donkey. Okay, a white donkey. Because the king would ride in on a donkey, and they usually would take a white donkey, and the king would ride in on a white donkey. Now, Jesus told his disciples, you go and you find me a donkey. Basically, a white donkey. The one that has never been ridden before. He was going to tame that donkey and ride it in Jerusalem on the same day, because he was the master of the universe, wasn't he? Could he tame a storm? Could Jesus tame a storm? He sure could. The wildest horses. Alexander the Great. You ever heard of him? Alexander the Great, he had a horse that he really liked. I can't think of the name of that horse. Odysseus or something like that. Remember that, Brother Rex? The name of that horse? You don't remember that? He had a horse. And they said the horse was absolutely untamable and they were going to destroy it. And he was a young man. And he said, I'll ride that horse. And he went out there and he talked to that horse and he rode that horse through almost every battle that he ever rode in. They said it was a terrifically powerful horse. And when it died, it saved his life. And when he died, or when the horse died, he named the city after it. after the horse. Well, Jesus tamed that horse and rode into, or donkey and rode into Jerusalem at the same time. When he comes back the next time, he's going to be a warrior. Revelation, the 19th chapter. He's going to come in. All right. And it says the Word of God. And who is the Word of God? Jehovah. All right. That's who the Word is. The Word of God. King of kings and Lord of lords. And how do you say King of kings and Lord of lords in Hebrew? Adonai ha'Adonai. King of kings and Lord of lords. That's who it is. You heard said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now just look and see. Jesus came riding a donkey, and a donkey is considered an animal what? A peace, because a donkey will not go into war. You can't get a donkey to go. Have you ever tried? How many of you ever had a donkey? Anybody around here ever fool around with a donkey? Huh? The first movie that I was ever in is called The Nevada Story, and I rode a donkey in this movie called The Nevada Story. I was in The Nevada Story, Charlie Varick, and Stallions. And anyway, the first movie I was ever in, I rode this donkey. And they were filming a documentary on Nevada. And I was up at the Cord Ranch in Fish Lake Valley. And the foreman over all the ranch, he wanted me to train some donkeys for him. They had some wild donkeys. And I had trained this donkey to drive and to ride. And they said, get on the donkey and ride it. So I got on the donkey and started riding. Well, I came up to a ditch that crossed the road right there. But donkey wasn't going to go across the ditch. Donkey won't do that. That's like the Grand Canyon to them. I mean, it's deep. They're not going to cross. They're not going to do anything that's going to endanger their lives. You don't ride a donkey into war. General George Crook said he was on a donkey one time, and it was a kind of a rough donkey. He hadn't trained it and everything, and he said it took off running and ran right through an Indian camp, and all these Indians were shooting arrows all around him, and he said he couldn't stop the donkey at all. And he ran into a completely wall on the other side, and ran past. He finally jumped off the donkey. It didn't work. First time he's going to come, he came riding on a donkey. The next time he's going to be on a stallion, a war horse. Heard an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. They wanted a warrior to be their Messiah. They just couldn't concept Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22. That is where the Messiah will suffer and die because of them, because of them. But I say to you, do not resist him who is evil. Did he resist them, actually? Did he resist these rats? He told them that they were wrong. Did he beat any of them up besides with words? He wouldn't one of these days. He's going to cast a bunch of them in hell in the end. But you know, Jesus is going to be the judge. Isn't he? He's going to be the judge. Because he's the God-man. He knew, he felt all the temptations of the body, but without sin. But I say to you, do not resist him who is evil. This is the word. This is bad. They were evil. He just called them a bunch of whoremongers just a few moments ago, remember? For that reason. But whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn it to him on the other side. Did he do that? Did Jesus do that? When they were trying him and beating him, they slapped him and slapped him and slapped him and slapped him. If you've seen that movie, The Passion, it's a pretty good depiction of what happened to Jesus. I don't say the movie is all right, but that depiction of what happened to God the Son, that's what happened. That's what he did. He did turn his other cheek to them. They weren't looking for this man. Now this is their king. This is the king of glory that they're beating up. This is Adonai. This is Jehovah, the one who shall become. If anyone wants to sue you, let him take your shirt. What happened to him at the cross? What did they do with his garments? They gambled for him. They took his clothes off, all the way down to his underwear. Left him naked on the cross. Was he naked on the cross? Did they take his coat? Did they even take his underwear? His underwear was sewn in one piece. They took that off of him. If he wants to sue you, they can take your shirt and let him have your coat also. Whoever shall force you to go a mile, go with him too. Now, back and during the Roman Empire, now what he's telling them, that you obey the Roman Empire. Remember later on when they were trying Jesus, these Pharisees, what did they bring? They brought a Roman coin to him. He said, and they asked him, shall we serve Caesar or God? And he said, give me a coin. What do you see on the coin? Caesar's image. And he said, what? Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God. All right? All of the things that he taught are the foundation of it is right here. Right here. And he's lambasting them. He's indicting them. A courier could come along and say, hey, I need you and I need your horse. And they could say, well, they could make you go a mile legally. And he says, if they ask you to go a mile, go 2 miles. Go the extra mile. That's where you say the old saying, go the extra mile. Go an extra mile. Help him out. Because in all reality, he's your servant. All right? Give to him who asked you, and do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you. Verse number 43. Did he do all of this? Did he do all of this? He did all the things that were here. Would the Pharisees do this? No way. But this is the King of glory that's come to them. These are the ethics of his kingdom that was to come. The millennial kingdom which they were rejecting. They were rejecting the millennium. Here the King of glory here. Well, could Jesus have brought in his kingdom? If they would have accepted him, but you know what? He knew they weren't. Isaiah 53, Psalm 22, that was written hundreds of years before this happened because he knew exactly what they were going to do. Again, the Jews hated the Romans. The Jews hated the Romans. The Romans did everything that they could to try to please the Jewish people. But the Jews kept calling heathens and dogs and unfit. When Pontius Pilate came into the city of Jerusalem, he threw a feast and not one Jew would come. None of the leaders would come. He kept trying to cater to them in every way. They would always object because he was a dog. He was a heathen. You shall love your neighbor as yourself and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Who's he talking about? Love those Romans. Love those enemies. Tell them to love them. Pray for those who persecute you. You think you've been persecuted? Pray for them. In order that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he causes the sun to rise on the whoremongers and the good, and sends rain upon the righteous and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax gatherers. The tax gatherers were who? They were the Jews, many of them, that had gone to work for the Roman government. They were collecting taxes, and that's about the way they collect taxes here. You know, taxes are good for you. You got to run your country. But just think about taxes now. Legal taxes. Taxes, it costs money to run. It takes money to run the church, doesn't it? We give to the church to help run the church. It's got to be done. Everybody just can't come and just sit down here and be cool or warm, and that's it. It costs money. Well, it costs money to run a country. What is the real problem with taxes? They take your tax money and they run with it. And they live in their fancy home, don't they? I've been reading a book about General George Crook. It's an autobiography. What does an autobiography mean? Look at it. This is something I was going to bring this up in the Greek. That word is Greek. Did you know that? Pure Greek. Not a bit of it is English. Nothing is English. Autobiography. That comes from the Greek word autos. That means himself. All right. Bios means what in Greek? Huh? Life. And then grapho is what? I write. I write about my own life. All in Greek. He wrote about his own life. He was in the Civil War. And he was, he didn't think much of General George Armstrong Custer. You hear about all the exploits that George Armstrong Custer did in the Civil War and all this kind of stuff, how he went and captured all these prisoners and everything else and got them all in. George Armstrong Custer sat back on his horse while General Crook went in and captured all of the enemy and won the battles, and then he runs in there real quick and took credit for it. And same thing with Phillips Sheridan. He said, I found out one thing in the Civil War. It's not who wins the battles. It's who gets credit for winning the battles. You know, all these politicians up here telling about how bad that guy over there did and how bad this guy over here done, when basically they did it all. Who's in charge? Are we in charge? What is a mess? What mess do we have in this country? Is it your fault? Or their fault? They're the ones that did it. Both sides. All right? Tax gatherers. These tax gatherers here were just about like the politicians today. They were supposed to give like 1%, let's just say 1%, to the government of your property. By the way, there was supposed to never be any income tax in America. Did you know that? How was America supposed to be run? How was it supposed to be run? Give you a little bit of political science right here. How was America supposed to be supported? All of those people that had property paid a certain amount of property tax. If you didn't have any property, you didn't pay any taxes. Nobody was supposed to ever pay any taxes out of your salary because you're working for somebody else. The people you're working for are supposed to be paying the taxes because they're the one that has the property. Okay? When the income tax was instituted, that's what was supposed to happen. Guess what they did to us? They turned the tables on us, didn't they? They don't pay any taxes. We pay their taxes. That's what happened back then. All right? 1%. All right? These are what they call the publicans or the tax gatherers, okay? The government wanted 1% of what your property was worth in a year or 5 years or whatever, okay? So they go out there and they designate tax gatherers to do this. So the tax gatherer goes over there and the Roman government says, now, we want 1%. Whatever you charge them, just charge them enough to pay your wages. Remember Zacchaeus that was up in the mulberry tree? Down there by Jericho? What did Zacchaeus say? You remember what old Zacchaeus said?
You ever eat,
Huh?
you ever eat cheated, you would pay them back 7 times 7?
He was a thief. He was a tax gatherer, and he was a rich tax gatherer. And how did he get rich? By stealing from people. Instead of charging 1 penny, he charged them 15 pennies for every dollar. So what happened? He only had to give the Roman government 1%, the 1 penny, and he kept 14. So they charged you 14 times more than what the taxes were, and they got by with it. Sound like the politicians today? They haven't changed one bit since Jesus' time, have they? Not a single solitary bit. Okay. The tax gatherers. Not even the tax gatherers, these thieves, do the same thing. They're good to their friends. Why? Brother Roger over there, your friend that was a tax gatherer last year, he only charged you 2 pennies. Everybody else had to pay 15 because you were his friend, see. That was, oh, they do that to their friends. They don't charge them much, but everybody else pays double and triple. And if you greet your brothers only, what do you do more than the others? And they always say what when they greeted their brothers? What do they say? What do they say over there in Israel today? The Jews and the Arabs both. What do they say? Shalom. Shalom. What does shalom mean? Peace. But what does it really mean? An agreement. There is no peace without an agreement. There will never be any peace without an agreement. There will never be any peace between you and God unless you have met the agreement of God. What is that agreement? We come to Him by the blood of His Son. All right? Do not even the Gentiles do the same thing. Do not even the heathens. All right? Now, verse number 48 is a very obscure verse. Obscure. That's hard to see. Therefore, you are to be what? What's it say there?
Perfect.
Perfect. What's perfect mean? Any of you been here perfect?
No.
I don't know anybody that's perfect. I never met one of them before. All right? I have never met anybody that's perfect. Brother John, you ever met any perfect patients? No, they're not perfect, are they? They're usually bent. When they come in there, they're all crooked, aren't they? Yeah. You try to make them perfect. Try to send them out in a little better shape than they come in, don't you?
Amen.
Therefore, you're to be perfect. That doesn't mean perfect health. That doesn't mean perfect morality. But what does it talk about here? Huh?
Sinless?
No, not sinless. How many of you have ever heard of Terminal Island? Terminal Island. Your dad built Terminal Island, didn't he?
Well, he didn't build it, he...
Had it built. Designed Terminal Island down there. Signal Hill and all that down where they shipped all the oil out. Terminal Island was the end. That's where the ships came in at the end. Terminal, terminus is where it comes from in Latin. Terminus means what? The end result. The end result. Also maturity. Paul wrote to the Corinthians and he said, I should be writing to mature individuals and yet you are speechless babies. Nepios. Speechless babies. He said, you're speechless babies in Christ. All these Jews, all of the leaders, were supposed to be examples to all the rest, weren't they? Isn't a leader supposed to be an example? All right? Leaders are supposed to be an example. Last Sunday morning, I told you General George Crook gave more or less orders than any other general that ever lived. He said the best order is what? Example. Follow me, fellas. Follow me. During the Civil War, there was a lot of skullduggery going on among the Southern troops and the Union troops. I think the Union troops held the record for the worst. Lawbreakers, rapers, thieves, and boy, did they give a bunch of them to General Crook. When they couldn't handle troops, they gave them to General Crook. And he said they would go in and they would sack a town or whatever else, and they would rape the women, and they would steal everything that was there. And the people would be absolutely starving to death after a Union army went through it. And he tried to correct his troops and make them not do that. He said, we're fighting a war. He said, we're warriors, not thieves and robbers and rapists. And he would correct them. He even killed a few of them. But they've given some of the most terrible troops. And he said, the thing about these troops, he said they were really violent, brutal people. But when he came to the thick of the war, he said they were on the sidelines. He said one time they drove them into battle. And he said he usually led his troops, but these people, he said, you couldn't lead. You had to push them. And he drove them into battle, and he drove them in there behind, and they started turning around and running. And he took his sword out and he started waving his sword over his head and said, "Where are you guys going, boys? That's the battle's underway." And he got them turned around just like the cutting horse, cutting back and forth, trying to drive them into the battle. These were the scallywags. He said he finally got out there and he had this other general with him trying to chase him into the battle so they could fight and win the battle. Okay? All they wanted to do was rape the women and steal and pillage like vultures on the body. He said he got in there, got to driving them so hard that he got right in the middle on the other side of the troops. And he said the other people had their swords out all, at least with the South. And he said one of them flashed his sword, and the guy that was right next to him, he cut the top of his hat off. He said his one didn't cut his head off. Trying to drive the troops into battle. Make soldiers out of them so they have discipline. God wants us to be disciplined. He wants us to be mature. Jesus talks to us many times as soldiers. We're in the Lord's army. Isn't there a song, "We're in the Lord's army"? Something like that. We are. Troops need to be disciplined. We need to be mature. He said one of the hardest things, he said when he had these troops that he had to train discipline, they just wanted to go fight a battle, he said. And he said orders are very, very important. Orders are very important. And they used to gripe at him all the time because he was stickler for orders. He said, "This is what you're supposed to do. When you hear this bugle, you do this. When you do this, this is what happens." And they said, "That's not important. Just point the enemy to us." Well, he got out there and he finally, these were old farm boys and everything. They didn't believe in discipline or anything. They were ready to fight. But he said, you have to learn how to fight with order, maturity. You have to know order. Finally, when they got mustered out of the army, they wouldn't muster them out until they filled out all of the forms. They'd get paid and they'd get mustered out. And they finally came back to him and said, "We thank you for giving us orders because you made us write down everything else. All the people that didn't do that didn't get mustered out and didn't get paid." There is a reason for order in God's churches today, isn't there? There's a reason for order in the kingdom of God. Why do we even come to church? Why do we come to church? Huh? To glorify God, to worship God, and to learn what we're supposed to do, to learn order. And our marching orders and our instruction manual is God's Word, isn't it? God never asked anything of you that He would do Himself with you. And He never asked you to do anything that's not good for you, does He? Chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6. Again, who's speaking?
Jesus.
Who's He speaking to? Basically, He's condemning and indicting the Pharisees. Now, He's talking to His little church also. But these indicting words are basically for the enemy. What did the enemy do? What was the Pharisees' life like? What does the name Pharisee mean? What was the name? What? It means separated. Split, separated. They separated themselves apart from all others. They were holier than thou, so to speak. Holier than anyone else. They made more laws. They added to the law of Moses. They said that's not enough. We have more laws that we have made that makes us better than everybody else. And now what is the first word that chapter 6 starts off with? Connie, are you over there?
Take
6:1.
Take heed that you do not your alms before men to be seen of them. Otherwise ye have no reward of your Father which is in heaven.
All right. What's the first term there? How does the King James go?
Take heed.
Take heed. What else is another word for take heed? Beware. Beware of practicing your righteousness in the face of men. In the faces of men. There's a word in the Hebrew face is paneh. And it talks about the face of God, all the faces of God. Like he's looking in four directions all at the same time, and he is in it, because he's omniscient and omnipresent. All the faces of God. God sees everything that we do, doesn't he? Beware of practicing your righteousness in the face of men, to be noticed by them. You're out here doing this for one reason, to be noticed. There's a Greek word for love. One of the strongest Greek words for love. What is that word? Huh? Agapeo. Or agape. Agape. Or agapeo. That's the word right there. Agapeo. And I read a book one time about some Greek so-called scholar wrote that he said, agapeo does not mean divine love and does not mean sacrificial love. It's just a word for love. Because the Pharisees said that they loved the praise of men more than they did their standing with God. They loved the praise of men so much. Now just think, how much did they love the praise of men? They loved it so much that they gave their eternal souls for it. Is that sacrificial love? That's sacrificial pride, isn't it? Yeah, it really means sacrifice. Beware of practicing your righteousness before men, to be noticed by them, otherwise you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. And this is even talking about in God's churches. Don't do things to be noticed by men. Do it to train up people. To train up people. To teach. Not to be noticed by men, but to be satisfying to God. Verse number 2, 6 and 2. When you therefore give, do anything of charity. That's where Paul is there. Do anything of charity. Do not sound the trumpet. Remember when the little old girl in the Bible, that little old gal that was poor widow, and she was starving to death, and she had 1 penny to her name. And back in those periods of time, they had 2 coins that made 1 penny. And that was what? Called a mite. That was a half a cent. A half a cent wouldn't buy very much. And she had 2 half-cent pieces. And she took them along, and you walk into the temple area, and in the temple area, there's a great big offering thing that goes like this. It's got a big opening here, and all the way down in here, it's like a trumpet. And it went down here into a basket. And the Pharisees would take their big, heavy coins, and they'd hit right the edge, and it would bounce in and go ting, 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 all the way down, rattling and clattering like a trumpet. They did it for that reason. They made this thing so their loud coins would hit the offering basket. And the little lady came there, and she puts in 2 widow's mites. And probably when she did, she dropped them right down the center where you wouldn't even hear them. It wasn't much, just a tinkle. Those 2 small coins. And what did Jesus say about her? That she gave more than all the rest. And they said, what? I couldn't even hear it. It was by the loudness of your offering. That's how high you held your head. Okay. When you give offerings, do not sound the trumpet before you as the what? Hypocrite. Hypocrite. What's hypocrite mean? Actors. The actors. Back in the Roman period of time and the Greek period of time, they had a stage that was well lighted out there, and an actor would get out there. One actor would get up and do all the parts. And he would, in the old movies, and back in the 40s and 50s, they had one movie that had three different little faces on it. It would have come out on the screen, and they would have these 3 masks. That was the mask. One of them sad, one of them plain, one of them happy. And the person would take a mask and they'd get behind it, and that was what's called a hypocrite, the actor. He said, you people are nothing but a bunch of actors. He said, like the hypocrites. And the Pharisees were the hypocrites. He's naming them as hypocrites. Doing all the what? Synagogue. These are their church services. The synagogue, the place of going together, synagogue. Moed is what the Hebrew word. The Jews lost their language, by the way. They might tell you that they knew their language all those years. They didn't know their language. During this period of time, they didn't know enough of their language to even call their synagogue a Moed. It was a synagogue. That's the Greek word for it, the place of going together. And in the streets, that they may be honored by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. Verse number 3. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. How many of you have heard of that old term? That's where it came from right here. Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Now, it doesn't mean Baptists are funny. Now, really, I mean, you go back and study Baptists, they're true. They're the true church and all that. But, boy, they have some weird things. One pastor taught his church that they were supposed to go and take their wallet out of their pocket. And when the offering came around, they're supposed to reach in their pocket and take out their money behind them, not knowing what they put into the plate, and they passed the offering plate behind all of them. So they didn't know what they were giving. That's funny. Really weird things. Weird practices. There was a Baptist church in the South one time that one of the guys went to town. And when he came back to church, he told them about seeing an ice-making factory where they made ice. And the church split over that. Because some of the people in the church believed him and some of them didn't. There was the ice Baptist and the no ice Baptist. I'm not kidding you. This is church history now. All right? Foolishness. All of it's foolishness. Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Let your alms be made in secret, and your Father who sees you in secret will repay you. All right. We'll start at number 5 next week. Thank you for your attention this week. And during those hard seats, I hope you learned something from God's Word. Brother David, where are you? There you are. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, there's one announcement, and Valley Baptist is having their 26th anniversary on